veteran's name sitting here is Danny Rhodes. He was born on August 19th, 1946. He served in the Army. He achieved the rank of Colonel. We're recording this on December 7th, 2012. I'm Schuyler Easterling, and I'm conducting an interview, no relation. Okay, Colonel Rhodes, to kind of start out, just tell me a little bit about where you were born and what kind of background or childhood you had growing up.
Okay, I was born in Gastonia, North Carolina. I'm a twin. There were 7 siblings in my family. I'm in the middle. There were 4 boys and 2 girls, and we had a very active family background, and we moved quite often, and we lived in Tennessee. We lived in a few places in South Carolina, back to Gastonia, which was the home place, but eventually we moved to Rock Hill, South Carolina when I was age 15, and that's where I finished high school, and that's still home today. My mother still lives there and a brother. I graduated from Rock Hill High School. At the time it was the only high school in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and then that was in 1964, and I came to Clemson in the fall of 1964 and graduated in August 1968. And at that time I entered active duty because I completed ROTC here at Clemson.
And so had you had any family members who had served in the military? Or?
Yes, I did. My dad served in World War II, and my oldest was in the Marine Corps, and he didn't see combat, but he was in the Marine Corps. Going back beyond that, many of my uncles served during World War II, as well as my dad. And I might just tell a little story. My great uncle was killed in World War I, and his name was Clarence William. And my uncle was killed in World War II. His name was Clarence William. And when my aunt, that uncle's sister, had a son, she wanted to name him after her brother and her uncle. But my grandmother said, absolutely not. We've already had 2 killed with that name. So she reversed the 2 names and named him William Clarence.
Okay.
Yes, a very, very military-oriented background. My father-in-law served. My brother-in-law served. So a lot of interest and involvement in the military.
So from an early age, was the military something you knew you wanted to do, or was it something?
No, it was not. I not even thought about serving in the military. When I came to Clemson in 1964, Vietnam was sort of a little hazy thing that was going on, not much in my purview about it. But at that time, all freshmen and sophomores had to serve in ROTC at Clemson. And so I joined ROTC. My freshman year, I became active in an organization called the Pershing Rifles, and through that service in the Pershing Rifles, of course, all of the members of the organization were focused on military things too, and I became more and more interested in the military, and Vietnam was going on, and I decided to join Advanced ROTC. Of course, it was not obligatory at the time, and I decided to join Advanced ROTC and go into the Army with a commission, which I did. I graduated in 1968 and entered active duty as a second lieutenant. So it was through my involvement in ROTC here and my association with a lot of other cadets who had a military focus that I became interested in the military. At that point, did not think about a career in the Army. Just wanted to go serve, and when I was in the Army, the more I was in, the more I liked it, and quite frankly, never thought about getting out. As we began to wind down after Vietnam, and the size of the Army was being reduced, many of my friends took options, got out, but it never entered my mind because I was enjoying it. My wife enjoyed the military, so I just continued to stay and retired.
I'm glad you did. So you graduated, you said, in 68, and from there you were sent where?
Well, I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky for the Armor Officer Basic Course. I might back up a little and say that when I first applied for my commission at Clemson, it was as a reserve officer. And then after summer camp at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, I qualified for a regular Army commission, and I reapplied. And originally I had asked for armor as my primary branch and got it as a reserve officer. And then when I was reapplying for a regular Army commission, I asked for armor again. By then, most of the quotas were filled up, and I could not get armor, and was given Transportation Corps. I was a bit disappointed at the time and talked to one of my professors in military science here and asked if I could get an exception and have it changed. But he gave me some very astute advice and said, well, how do you know if you'll like armor? You know, we could probably get it changed now, and then you not like it, then you're not likely to get a change again. So why not try Transportation Corps, and if you don't like that, then try for something else. Well, as we know, God has a plan for us all, and I was destined, I think, to go into the Transportation Corps because I became interested in aviation during my first assignment, applied for flight school, and Transportation Corps was probably the best place for me to have a career in aviation at the time.
Well,
so I went off to Fort Knox.
Okay.
I might say at the time, regular Army officers who had a primary non-combat armed branch had to serve in a combat arms for 1 to 3 years to sense of what the combat arms were like so that we could provide better support. So I spent 12 months in the Armor Corps, and I went to Fort Knox for the basic course. From there I went to Airborne School and went to the 82nd Airborne Division, where I served in the 17th Cavalry there for a year. At the end of my 12 months serving in the 17th Cav, I then transferred automatically over to Transportation Corps. Went to the Transportation Orientation course, then flight school, and began my career as an aviation officer.
Okay. Now, so even though you were under the branch of the Army, you were still an aviation officer.
At the time, we needed so many aviators in Vietnam because aviation was evolving at the time. The helicopter was being used more and more, and there was such a great need for aviators. Quite frankly, it didn't matter what branch one served in. You could go to flight school if you were qualified. I had friends in the Chemical Corps who were aviators in Vietnam, military police branch, quite frankly, any branch. And then when Vietnam was over, the need for aviators decreased. Then, in order for one to continue to fly, he had to be in either the infantry branch, artillery, armor, or Transportation Corps. And then in 1983, when the Army created an aviation branch, then you had to transfer to the aviation branch in order to continue to fly. So I did so and did the same job as a Transportation Corps aviator, but my branch then was aviation.
What was it that you enjoyed most about flying that drew you to aviation?
I just the excitement of being able to fly, the freedom that being able to get up above the ground gave me, the sense of flexibility that it provided in terms of being able to accomplish various activities and missions that we really needed during Vietnam, and of course have needed since then. And I was just excited to be a part of that evolution during Vietnam. And so many things were being tried, so many new concepts. The doctrine was changing, technology was, and it was just exciting to be a part of that evolution of the helicopter as a specific element of the armed forces.
So did you have a feeling, you knew, of course you mentioned when you left Clemson that Vietnam was starting, but it was getting more involved. What, did you know instantly that you were going to be sent, as soon as you completed, your training, that you would be sent over, and what was your feeling on that?
Oh yes, we all knew that we were going to Vietnam, and as a matter of fact, I was late in being sent to Vietnam because of that transitional nature of my service that I mentioned. Going through Armor Basic and Airborne School, and then the 12-month detail in Armor and Transportation Corps and Aviation training and all of that. So I had been in the Army a couple of years before I'd gotten to Vietnam. But we all knew that, and it was not something we dwelt on at the time. It was not something that we really dreaded or anything of that nature, at least the guys with whom I was associated. Conversely, some of the service members who were drafted, who probably didn't have an interest in serving as a career or anything like that, maybe they had a lot of trepidation and anxiety about it, and fear in that regard, particularly those serving as infantrymen who were going to see the worst type of combat that we had in Vietnam. But it was not something we thought about. It was really more of an exciting, an attitude of excitement, because we were getting to go to flight school. I mean, that was just amazing. I mean, just imagine the the opportunity to learn how to fly. I mean, that was so exciting. And, you know, one could conjure up the idea of Snoopy with his yellow scarf tied around him, you know, and flying. But that was a bit of the environment at the time. That, you know, we were sort of footloose and fancy-free, so to speak, and devil-may-care attitudes. We thought we could conquer the world, and so it was just real exciting to go through that. And even going to Vietnam, you know, there was anxiety, certainly, about leaving family behind, and you know, the fear of the unknown. You know, what would Vietnam be like? What would combat be like? So it was not so much fear; it was just anxiety and not knowing what to expect when we got there. But again, there was a degree of excitement about going because we were going to be able to put to practice what we had been training for. You know, sort of like a football player or any athlete. You know, you practice, 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 and you don't want to sit on the sidelines during the game. You want to get into the game and use all of those talents that you've developed. So that was a bit of our attitude at the time as well.
So you left from where to go to Vietnam?
Well, I had just completed flight school, and as a Transportation Corps officer, I was sent through Chinook transition, the CH-47 cargo helicopter. I had begged and pleaded to go through the UH-1, the Huey transition, because that was true aviation as far as I was concerned at the time. But being a Transportation Corps, most TC officers went to CH-47 training. And then after that, I went to Fort Eustis for a 13-week course for aviation maintenance officer. So I had completed that training at Fort Eustis, and then had leave, and then departed to go to Vietnam. So I went there as a maintenance officer in a Chinook company.
Okay. And what kind of transportation did you fly, or did you take a boat to Vietnam? How did you get
we flew to Vietnam. I recall flying into McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and we then flew, as I recall, it was a C-141. We flew from there. Well, it may have been a commercial airplane, I don't recall. But at any rate, we flew through Alaska for a refueling stop, and from there we flew into Yokota Air Base in Japan for a refueling stop, and then into Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon. Okay.
So you got to Saigon, I guess, and what was the feeling there? Was the morale good when you entered, or what was the feeling among the men when you arrived?
Well, when we arrived in Vietnam, in Saigon, we were sent over to an orientation center to get a couple of days of briefings and orientations and about the culture and health and things of that nature. So we were quite isolated. We saw very few. Well, the service members we saw, the Army guys we saw, were just those who were in charge of this center and this in-processing thing. There we got our assignments, and then we moved from there out to our assignment location. So I was assigned to the 178th Assault Support Helicopter Company, a Chinook company, which was located in Chu Lai, up in I Corps, the northern sector of Vietnam. And we were attached to the 23rd Infantry Division, the AmeriCal Division. So we were one of two Chinook companies that supported the AmeriCal Division. So we got there and spent a day, 1 to 2 days of orientation, and then moved into filling our responsibilities. And so it was a few days, about a week, before I really got into my unit and got to meet the fellas and get to know them. And I would say that the morale was good. During Vietnam, we had a real issue of discipline, and I was quite frustrated to see what was going on there. And of course, in an aviation unit, we're top heavy, a lot of commissioned officers, a lot of warrant officers, you know, as many as we had enlisted men and NCOs. So there was almost a feeling of almost like rank has its privileges. It was almost like the golden spoon type of environment among the officers there, thinking that they were somewhat blessed to be aviators and really just focused primarily on flying, didn't want to do a whole lot more. And because we needed so many leaders in that time frame, we all attained rank very quickly. And that fed this problem of discipline, because on the enlisted side, if a soldier graduated top of his class in basic training, advanced individual training, he came out with a rank of PFC and Specialist 4, went to the NCO Academy right away because he was cream of the crop, so to speak, and then came out of the NCO Academy as a staff sergeant. That could happen with a year of service. And we call that shake and bake. That was the term at the time. Just shake them up, bake them real quick, and throw them out there. And then the same thing, similar things happened with the officers. I remember making captain in 2 years. 2 years as a captain. 1 year as a second lieutenant, 1 year as a first lieutenant. And then I remember standing in formation at flight school one day, and our student commander called out and asked me to come to the forward and read a promotion order and pinned captain bars on me, and that's the way I got it. So I went to Vietnam with less than 3 years active duty and had tremendous responsibility. And so I was immature in my experience. I'd served with soldiers 1 year in the 82nd. We had a real issue of discipline because we had a lack of experience. We also had a phenomenon of people above wanting to do the job of those that were beneath them. Battalion commanders trying to do the job of the company commanders, and the company commanders trying to do the job of their platoon leaders, and all the way down. And so we just had this real issue of discipline. So that was the thing that I remember most about my experience in Vietnam and the frustrations associated with that. We had officers and NCOs who were really scared, afraid to go into the barracks of the soldiers for what might happen to them. You've heard the stories about officers and NCOs getting fragged, meaning a grenade would be thrown in their area. I fortunately didn't witness any of that, but I did witness a lot of lack of respect for superiors and a lack of, well, actually too, a lot of issues of officers and NCOs not fulfilling their responsibilities. So that caused soldiers not to respect them. And we suffered from that after Vietnam for a while too, and it was quite frankly, it was into the decades of the 80s before we came out of that and became a more disciplined, focused professional service at the time.
So you cited that you were a little frustrated with the way things were going, but what daily life, what was it like for you? Was it I know it was an adjustment, I would assume.
Oh, yeah, yes, it was an adjustment because, everything was focused on the job, the task at hand. I mean, everything. I would get up early in the morning. I had another commissioned officer. I had a couple of warrant officers. I had a senior NCO. I had several senior and middle grade NCOs as technical inspectors. And I was really responsible for, the maintenance of 16 helicopters. Getting them prepared every day, or the number prepared to meet the missions that we had each day. Mechanics, of course, and all the different specialties. The crew chiefs really didn't report to me. They reported to the flight platoon leaders, but they did defer to me a lot because they were responsible for maintaining their helicopter. Of course, we worked with them a lot, making sure the helicopters were maintained properly. So it was a matter of each day getting the mission from the operations officer of the company, actually the day before we knew how many aircraft we'd have to put up the next day. Sometimes we could meet the requirements, sometimes we couldn't. And there was always not a battle, but a discourse between operations and maintenance as to how many aircraft could fly, how many we could send out for missions each day. And so it was a matter then of working to get those helicopters ready. The ones that would come in the night before, we often had night missions as well. Looking at those, figuring out what was wrong with those. Were they capable of being sent right back out, or was something wrong with them that we had to tend to that next day? So that was the focus. I mean, it was just constant, just day in, day out, 7 days a week, working on the aircraft, getting them ready to fly. We would have to test fly them. That was one of the responsibilities of myself and my other commissioned officer and the two warrant officers I had, was to test fly them to ensure they were flight worthy. And there was some nighttime work too, because we'd have to work on the helicopters at night. and we'd be down supervising that, finding out whether they were going to be ready to go the next day or not. Okay, so long days, long nights, but we had nothing else to do. That was the focus.
Well, so did you have much free time when you were not working on helicopters? What would you do in your free time when you were?
Well, free time consisted of primarily time in our what we called hoochies, our little hut that we would have, and I lived with some of my maintenance officers, and at nighttime we would just play cards or some kind of games, or it's kind of funny. I remember, particularly after we moved to Da Nang, the 23rd Infantry Division was scheduled for deactivation, and this was in 1971 as the war began to wind down. We didn't need as many forces, so our unit was tabbed to move further north to Da Nang. We moved into Marble Mountain Airfield, which was a former Marine Corps air base, and there we had better conditions. We had running water, and so we could take showers, and had flush toilets, which was a real a blessing. But I recall there our little hut was better, but we always had problems with insects, and at night we would pass some time sometimes of turning the lights out, and we had a BB gun, and we'd shine the light upon the ceiling along the walls, and little beetles would run around, and we would target practice against them. Just little crazy things of that nature. But rarely did we have time to do things in country. We were fortunate to be located near an in-country R&R center, Rest and Recuperation Center. There was a beach near Da Nang where soldiers would go and spend a couple of days for recovery. I would go there a couple of times whenever I could weasel a day off or half a day off. The weather was nice. I would go there and just chill out on the beach a little bit and take a swim. But again, no overnights or anything of that nature. We would occasionally be able to go over to the Air Force Base at Da Nang. They had a couple of restaurants there. We'd go over and catch an evening meal there. I remember a Thai restaurant there that was nice. So that was about it as far as recreation goes. Not much time for things like volleyball matches or any of that nature, just because of the nature of the work.
Did you have any experiences with the locals, with the Vietnamese?
Yes, I did, because we used them for services on the post. They would come in, we would pay them out of our pocket a small amount of money to clean our hoochies, as we call them, clean the huts that we lived in. They would perform other services on the post, basically cleaning services around, some with the mess hall, things of that nature. So we got to know them that way. And also, again, they worked in some of the, as I mentioned, the restaurants at the Air Force Base and other places like that. The exchange, the post exchange would use them to some degree. We got to know some of them that way. Yes, so my experience with them was they are just like any other person around the world. I've traveled extensively around the world, and people are the same everywhere. If you get to know them on a one-to-one basis. Now, you may have cultural differences, you may have political differences, and things of that nature, but if you just treat them as a human being and they treat you as a human being, we got along well. We would know their family members and trade pictures and things of that nature. It was primarily with women and primarily with old men, because the other men were out fighting, either on one side or the other.
So did you feel well received or did they resent the American occupation in some regards, or it was more an economic opportunity?
Well, it was for those that came on the post to work, it was an economic opportunity, and but we did sense some feelings of objection for being there in their country, because we were fighting. Now, I was not out like infantrymen, seeing people in the little villages and things of that nature. When I would go out and fly, it would be mainly to support the U.S. forces. We'd go into artillery locations to drop off fuel and ammunition or take troops out, things of that nature. So I was not there to, I didn't have the opportunity to really see the people out in the natural settings. So those with whom I was associated were probably more friendly to the Americans because of, you say, of that economic advantage that they received from it.
I know. So you mentioned that with the helicopters, you'd go and do different missions with support. You mentioned the fuel and supplies. Did you ever conduct any rescue missions at all?
I did not. I did not. And rarely would a Chinook be involved in a rescue mission unless it was one of going out to recover a downed helicopter or some vehicle that had to be extracted or taking something from one spot to the other because they needed it in an outpost somewhere. So it's not rescuing soldiers that were injured. That was left up to the Hueys. Okay, but the kinds of missions that we had, as I said earlier, were to fly either internal or external loads. External meaning sling loads of rations, ammunition, fuel, food to the troops that were in the outpost throughout Vietnam. We often would carry not as much as the Hueys did, but we would frequently get a requirement to take in a large number of people. Chinook would carry up to 33 soldiers, so sometimes we'd just have a load of soldiers taking them out to a location, but it was mainly just resupply.
And really, when you started, were you under fire at all under any of these situations? What was the most scared you were? Did you fear for your life at all on a lot of these missions?
Well, we would occasionally take fire going into some of the outposts because the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong would be nearby those outposts. Being a maintenance officer, I didn't fly that many operational missions. Most of my time was spent test flying and resupply and maintenance runs of that nature. But those that did fly a lot of operational missions would quite often take small arms fire, and it depended upon the location. Units attached to the 101st, for example, 101st Airborne Division in very northern I Corps received a lot of fire. You can go back to the archives and look at those pilots in units that supported places like Khe Sanh, and they'd go in and there would be artillery. The Viet Cong would have it earmarked. By test firing, they knew exactly how to pinpoint the landing strip, and as aircraft would come into the landing strip, they would shoot a mortar or an artillery round. So there are a lot of pilots that lost their lives that way, and of course the Huey pilots a lot of those lost their lives or were injured because of flying into hot landing zones. But for us, it was primarily small arms fire, and I did on a couple of occasions receive small arms fire, but nothing serious. I can remember at night flying once and seeing the tracers coming toward the aircraft. Fortunately, they didn't hit us, so that was the extent of my experience with taking fire from the enemy. Now, we would frequently receive fire at night on the post where we were from artillery and mortar rounds coming in, and we would have defensive plans to go out. Occasionally there were probes where Viet Cong were trying to get inside the perimeter, and we had reaction plans for that as well. So that was about as close as I came to actual combat as we might define it, as exchanging fire and being shot at and shooting at other forces.
So your day-to-day operation, you said, you would really work on the maintenance, the helicopters, and of course occasionally go out. But how long did that go on? How many years were you in Vietnam, or how many months?
Well, Vietnam was a one-year assignment, and actually my 1 year was cut short because, again, I got there later in the war, and units were beginning to stand down, be deactivated. And even after we deployed from Chu Lai to Da Nang, Marble Mountain Airfield, our unit was tabbed to deactivate, so I came home a couple of months early. So I only spent about 9 months in Vietnam. Okay, and so we were at the end. We spent a few weeks, probably the better part of a month, trying to get the aircraft ready for redeployment home, cleaning them up, again, making sure that the fungus and the bacteria and all those things were not there. The tools likewise. Soldiers would rotate out so many each day as we began to decrease the unit, and eventually then we all went home as we turned in everything and got everything ready to go.
And I was going to ask you, I know you said that you were getting the bacteria and fungus. How hard was the conditions of Vietnam on those helicopters? I figured the weather would be so extreme on the helicopters. What was it like maintaining?
Well, it was tough, very hot, very humid climates, and that caused us a lot of issues. I tell you that the greatest challenge we had, though, was from a typhoon. We were packing up to move from Schuyler to Da Nang, and we self-deployed. Because we had Chinooks, we could carry a lot of our own equipment. The heavy stuff we loaded on barges, and Vietnamese then would take the barges up the river from Schuyler to Saigon, and then we would transload it there. And I recall that we got word this typhoon was coming, and it was the last day of packing out of Schuyler. We already had a lot of our equipment, a lot of our soldiers at the new location, and Friday was a down day. This last day of transloading was Thursday. We had Friday with no missions, so we could get everything unpacked and get everything set up, and we had missions then lined up for Saturday. So Friday we did that, and the word was that this typhoon was coming, and so our missions were canceled for Saturday morning, and the eye of the typhoon hit Schuyler, where we had just vacated. And of course we weren't that far from Schuyler with Da Nang, but I recall that Saturday morning going down with my officers and NCOs. There was nothing we could do, but we just tried to secure everything. We tightened up the tie downs on the blades of the helicopters and those kinds of things as best we could, not knowing what was going to happen, and went back and grabbed an early lunch and then took a nap. I mean, how often do you get a chance to take a nap in the middle of the day? So we took advantage of that, and I remember somebody pounding on my door yelling, Captain Rhodes, come. The Chinooks are getting blown all over the place. So I don't know what to expect. I put my equipment on, went outside, and literally came around the corner and was almost knocked over by the wind. You see these pictures of people doubled over. That's how strong it was. And so I was literally trying to, fight off the wind going into this huge, storm that we were having. And literally I had to dodge and bend down because sheets of tin were flying off the hoochies just across there, and it was just a havoc everywhere. And I eventually got down to the flight line, excuse me, and all I could do was kneel down and behind some cover and just watch the destruction. We parked our aircraft north to south, which was the direction of the runway, and the beach was just on the other side of the runway. Quite frankly, we were that close to the beach, and the wind was coming in a quartering headwind, so it was coming from the northwest, and the wind would just lift those helicopters up like this. Chinook had 3 huge blades on the front, 3 in the back. It would just lift them up and take them in the direction of that wind and put them back down. And the force was so strong, I watched those huge blades just snap half in two like this, pieces being flown off. We had revetments in which we parked the helicopters, and these were 55-gallon drums filled with sand stacked too high. And there were different ways of creating revetments, but that's what we had. And that would protect the helicopters if mortars or artillery would come in and explode, and a lot of that shrapnel would then not go to the helicopters. And I watched as the wind picked these helicopters up, it would push them back into these two stacks of 55-gallon drums, knock them over, so there was sheet metal damage to the skins of the aircraft. And so that went on all afternoon. And finally, by nightfall, it had subsided, the storm had moved on. I recall that at Da Nang Air Force Base, which is right next by, the machine that measured the wind broke at 86 knots. So it was a pretty hefty storm that we had. So the next day we began to assess the damage. We had a Boeing technical representative who came there, And after inspecting all 16 helicopters, assessing all of the damage, we worked all night long Sunday night, getting one, and Monday morning we had one ready, one of 16 ready to go. And we picked two of our best pilots to take that mission out, and as they were taxiing out, lo and behold, they got too close to the rear of another helicopter, and the blades intermingled, and so it didn't get off for the mission either, so we had more blades damaged. But it took us literally 90 days to completely recover, and we finally got the last aircraft up at 90 days because of the time required, the shortage of parts, getting all the parts shipped back from overseas that we needed. So that was the most severe effect we had of the weather. But again, back to your original question, there was a lot of damage to the aircraft over time because of the humidity and a lot of blowing dirt and dust and sand. Chinook is a pretty big helicopter going into these fire support bases and these outposts around. It would kick up in the dry season tremendous dirt and dust, and that would all get into the components. And then the grinding effect of the dirt in those components created a lot of problems for us as well.
It's a never-ending job.
Never-ending job, that's right.
So by the time, I'm sure you were exhausted. I know you, were you ready to go home by the time your service was done?
In one respect, I was ready because I missed my family. I was married, had gotten married a few months before I went to Vietnam. No children yet, but there was a sense of an unaccomplished job as well. Of an unfinished job, one that was not completely accomplished. And there were friends in other units that were still there. Some of the members of our unit got transferred into other units. If they had less than 6 months in country, they didn't get to go home early, and so they were moved in to fill vacancies in other units. So there was a lot of feelings of sadness about leaving a job undone and about leaving some of our fellow soldiers behind and officers, and that was unfortunate. And for example, after I got back to the U.S. and went to my next assignment, there were stories of some of those that we left behind who were injured or killed, and that was very, very upsetting to us to know that, not that we could have done anything, but if we'd been there, maybe we could have helped, or just a frustrating feeling at that point.
And so you left Vietnam in what year, what month?
I came back in March of 1972, yes, and I went to Fort Eustis, Virginia, of course, home of the Transportation Corps, and had a desk job there. I did some teaching in the courses, officer courses, the basic course, the advanced course. Then that August, I was scheduled to attend the advanced course myself, so I was a student then for 9 months. And then after that, then I moved on to another assignment at that point.
And so, when were you able to see your family, right? When you got back, I know you said your wife, was she living in Virginia at the time? Because you...
No, since Rock Hill was my home, we got a small apartment there, and she was attending Winthrop College, and so she was going back to school and living in this little apartment. And she met me at the airport by herself. There was no great big homecoming because, again, I didn't know exactly when I was going to leave. There was a tremendous demand on the transportation system at the time because there were so many people being sent back. There was so much equipment being sent back. When we were cleared to leave our unit, we went over to an out-processing center, a small place, and we would just wait there until an airplane was available for us to go. And there was a manifest, there was a priority list, and quite frankly, I recall spending 2 days there. I don't remember, 3 maybe, and those were very, very frustrating days. Almost like we were caught in prison. We couldn't go back to our unit to do anything because we'd already been cleared. We couldn't leave, and we couldn't go home. We were just stuck there for a couple of days. So I wasn't sure. I wasn't able to communicate with my wife because, again, we didn't have cell phones back then. And flew into Tacoma Air Force Base in Washington, and was able to call her at that point and let her know about the next flight I had coming home into Charlotte. when I came home for R&R in December of '71, that was more of a big reunion. A lot of my friends were there to meet at the airport. It was a big homecoming. But at that point, when I came in at the end of my tour, she just met me there, and not a lot of fanfare.
But had you been able to keep much contact with your family and your wife while you were in Vietnam? How often were you able to?
Well, it was mainly through mail, and we did have a capability to call periodically through the MARS capability, Military Affiliate Radio System, and it's basically a relay process. And you'd have to get your name on a list, and then wait. And there were priorities. Those that had death in the family had priorities, or Red Cross issues, family issues validated through the Red Cross, emergencies. All of those had priority. So for a guy just to want to call and talk to his wife, you were down at the bottom of the list. You see. So there were a couple of those phone calls during my time there, but not many. It was mainly through the mail.
Well, I know you were happy to see him again. When you got back to America, though, what was the biggest thing to you that had changed? Had much changed, and what were you well received when you got back to America?
Well, no, you can study the environment in the United States at that time, and there was not a lot of respect for the military during that time frame. A lot of people were against the Vietnam War, so they took that dislike of war into a dislike of the military, and that was manifested into a dislike of people in uniform. That was very frustrating to come back to, serving our country, doing what we were expected to do, and not that we wanted any recognition for it, but the reverse of that. Not only was there not recognition, there was a lot of outcry against us at the time, picketing and all of those sorts of things. So that was very humiliating, quite frankly, to come back to.
What kind of things did you ever receive? Any verbal attacks or abuse at all on you?
Well, not directly to me, mostly from the distance. Comments under a person's breath as you pass by, some derogatory comment under their breath. Less than favorable gazes and stares at you, whispering to each other, looking and pointing. I was never physically accosted, or no one ever got in my face and yelled at me or anything of that nature. I just didn't put myself in a position where I would be confronted by pickets or anything of that nature, people who were out picketing, and so it was more of an indirect nature of what I experienced.
Now, from Vietnam, I know you said you transitioned into still military life, and you were stationed where, and I know now you face the challenges, the continuing ongoing challenges of the Cold War. What were your post-war capacities?
Okay, well, I stayed in aviation logistics for many years, and I was assigned to a Chinook company, again as a maintenance officer. At Fort Benning, we deployed to Fort Stewart when the 23rd Infantry Division the 24th Infantry Division was being reactivated. Served there for 3 years, went to Germany, and of course with the 24th Division, we had contingency plans, so we would train and be prepared for deployment. But in Europe, I came face to face with the Cold War, and served there. I was in an aviation maintenance battalion. We supported the aviation units in the 7th Corps, and so we had soldiers that would go out and support units that were flying along the international German border between East Germany and West Germany. Contingency plans, a lot of exercises on the what-ifs if we were invaded by the Russians or the East Germans, primarily the Russians being supported by the East Germans. So that we came face to face with the Cold War there. And everything we did was to defend West Germany from an attack.
Did you ever feel like an attack was going to come, or you just felt
we had increased defense conditions, because something would occur. There would be some occurrence on the eastern side or some occurrence on the western side. For example, the Armored Cavalry regiments would screen the border. That was their mission, and from an aviation perspective, they'd have helicopters that would fly just inside the border. Every once in a while, not very often, but a few times, one would go down, and it would be located wherever it went down, very close to that border, and we'd have to send an element out from our unit to recover the helicopter. Those are always tense times, because if somebody just merely by mistake wandered over the border, it could cause an international incident. So those were some very tense times from that regard. There would always be some sort of international incident at very high levels, and the Russians would get all agitated, or the United States would get agitated, and there'd be threats, and so our defense conditions would go up. So those were some anxious times. We always had practices for that eventuality, and our families would get involved. We always had plans to evacuate the families. We always were encouraged to have at least a half a tank of gas in the car, kits available, some food and clothing, so that if something did happen, there were plans on how to get the families out over to the places of embarkation, either by air or by sea. So those are some tense times when you go through that with the families. Kids would get upset, what's going on? But fortunately, we never had to implement those plans.
I was going to ask you, so your family went with you to Europe?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. And you had children at the time?
I had a daughter during the first tour, and our son was born there during that first tour. Yes.
Could they speak German at all? Or?
Oh yes, kids at that age had learned it very quickly, and much quicker than adults. But we learned a fair amount of German to get by, and we lived on the economy for a while in a German community, which was always better in my estimation of learning the culture and getting to know the people. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so now, how long were you in Germany for?
I was there for 3 years, and served in a aviation maintenance battalion as a captain. I was selected for promotion to major, was reassigned to Army Europe headquarters in Heidelberg, so I went there and served as a staff officer. After that, back for schooling, Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. From there, back to Fort Bragg, where I served in the support command of the 18th Airborne Corps. Those were in transportation assignments primarily. I was then selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel, and my responsibilities changed at that point. And I was executive officer in a support group. And after that promotion, then I was selected for battalion command, went back to Germany, and was fortunate to be able to command the same battalion in which I served as a captain during that first tour. So it was an easy transition, because I knew the mission, I knew the terrain, the territory, the units we supported. And so I served there for 2 years as a battalion commander, a very rewarding experience. Then moved to the European Command, served on the staff at the European Command. Came back to the States for an assignment in the Army Personnel Center, chief of the Enlisted Personnel Management branch for aviation-related specialties for enlisted men. That was 1 year. I got picked up for the War College, attended National War College at Fort McNair. After that, went to the Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base, served 3 years there as the Plans and Operations Director for the Logistics Directorate, and then became the Deputy Director of Logistics there. And then my last assignment was at Fort Gillem in Atlanta, and I was chief of an evaluation directorate there. We had 9 teams that evaluated readiness of active and National Guard units and some active units. About 2/3, 3/4 of the evaluations were of National Guard and Army Reserve units. There was an issue during the build-up for Desert Storm where reserve component units were not prepared adequately and could not be certified as being combat ready, so they couldn't deploy. And so this was an effort to assist them to maintain a level, to enhance their readiness and help them maintain a level of readiness. And of course we know that is the case today, because we have so many National Guard and Army Reserve units that deploy just like the active units. So that effort was started after the first Desert Storm, and and it continued. So I served there for 2 years and then retired in 1994.
Okay. So what was your biggest challenge out of all of those to you as a lieutenant colonel? I know you had a great deal of responsibility. What was your biggest challenging assignment during your career in the military?
Well, battalion command was the biggest challenge. In my view, command is always the biggest challenge. It can be the most rewarding as well, but the responsibilities a commander has, and particularly in a deployed location, because the members of the unit do not have their extended families there. You know, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandmothers, etc. And so the unit becomes their family. And some make that adjustment, some don't. So a lot of issues associated with that. You know, people not having their extended families there. And so you try to fill that void for them. And morale, esprit de corps, all of those things become even more important. And all of the challenges that a commander has, along with subordinate commanders and staff officers and the NCOs, of keeping the soldiers focused, keeping them busy, keeping them out of trouble. You know, safety issues, discipline issues, and back in those days too, it was tougher for resupply, and you know, we didn't have airlift and sea lift as fast as we have today, so it took a lot longer to get repair parts and supplies in. So our ability to do our mission and keep aircraft flying was a greater challenge at the time. So that was the most demanding assignment I had, was battalion command. But again, most rewarding.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, with your military experience too, I know the military has impacted your life unbelievably. What was its biggest impact on you as a man, if you could pinpoint one? That's kind of a tough question.
Well, the sense of satisfaction of serving our country. You know, it may sound trite, but again, you know, you commit yourself totally to it. I mean, every day, every hour, day in, day out. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. You're a member of the armed forces. You're looked upon as a member of the armed forces. Your friends are members of the armed forces. Your kids grow up in it, going to school on post or in the community with other military kids. You know, your spouses are involved in all kinds of support activities. My wife was always very active in Red Cross, PTA, Wives Club, thrift shop, you know, all of those things that wives were expected to do. And so we literally ate, drank, and slept the military. It was total. But we did that not out of a sense of requirement, but out of a sense of obligation. It was something that we wanted to do. You know, no one made us make a career. You know, of course, when we had the draft, you know, many soldiers had to serve unwillingly, but you know, for those of us that were in for a career, we did it because it was a calling, and we did it out of a sense of obligation to our country, and it was very satisfying. And you know, the ability as an officer to influence the lives of others was an awesome responsibility, but that has been most satisfying because still today I'm contacted. I recall just 2 months ago I got a call in the middle of the evening from an NCO. He was a Sergeant E5 at the time, who served with me when I was a captain in Germany. And I saw him a couple of times after that. When I was in Germany the second time, I found him, or we found each other, and he came to spend Christmas with us one year. But I hadn't seen him since. I mean, it'd been 30 years. I just got this call, and he tracked me down. And so we're planning a reunion. He's going to come see me. So, you know, those kinds of things, the bonds you build with people with whom you served. You know, our closest friends are those with whom we served. We still stay in touch with them. They're scattered all over the U.S. Those are the most rewarding things, I would say. The joy of command and the opportunity to influence the lives of soldiers and subordinate officers and NCOs, and the ability just to serve in that capacity, to serve our country.
It's an unbreakable bond.
It is.
Now, to kind of conclude this interview, one thing that saddens me, and I hope it's not a trend, but I know as we've go farther and farther along through history, and World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and Cold War, and even the Gulf War will become further and farther along. What is most important to America's youth that they know about the military and how to honor the military and keep that in mind?
Well, to go back on just what I spoke about is they need to be constantly reminded of the obligation to serve. And we've gotten away from that, I think, with a lot of our youth today. And I don't mean just serving in the military, but I'm a member of an organization here called the Clemson Corps. And we've been able to accomplish a couple of things, one of which is to honor the Clemson alumni who lost their lives in service to our country through the Scroll of Honor. And more recently, we've completed what is called the Clemson University Memorial Park, in which the Scroll of Honor is located. And the whole focus for that park, to include the Scroll of Honor, is on service. We have an obligation to serve, and there are many ways in which to serve. And we're trying to encourage young people today through the park and through visits to the park and other activities to commit to lifetimes of service in some capacity. And we see the ultimate level of sacrifice being those that gave their lives in service to our country. And there are other memorials to honor first responders as well. Many of those have given their life in service to our country. And so the efforts like you have here to document service of military members is tremendous. So we just need to remind these young people that they do have an obligation to serve the country. We have so many blessings here, and they don't come free. There's always if you go down to the Memorial Park near the Scroll of Honor here on Clemson University, you'll see what we call the National Colors Monument, the flag, and at the base of that flag there's a quote, "Freedom is not free," and it isn't. And so we've got to keep the memory of this sacrifice alive, so that people understand how important it is, and that they too, if they can't serve, then they need to support those who are serving.
I agree. That was something to always keep in mind. But Colonel Rhodes, I thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to come in and sit down for an interview, and thank you for your service, and very appreciative to you for your time in the military as well as your time today.
Well, thank you, Schuyler.